This is how to prepare acrylic paint for pouring. Welcome back everyone, this is G, and today we're breaking down the basics of preparing acrylic paint for use in fluid art. This is a really simple concept to wrap your head around, and it will help you understand recipes from me and any other content creator or artist whose work you might like. So in fluid art, there are two main components, a solid and a fluid. The paint is the solid component, the pouring medium is the fluid. So let's first take a look at the solid component, the acrylic paint. Acrylic paint comes in several bodies, a term that describes the viscosity of the paint. While the container itself can be a tube, a jar, a squeeze bottle, or even bottle caps, what we care about is the body. The default, meaning if nothing on the label says otherwise, should be medium body. Anything that isn't medium body will usually say so. So this Liquitex is a heavy body, this Artist Loft is a soft body, this Mixed Media Girl is a premixed paint and sometimes also called a pouring paint. And the best way to show this to you is just to squeeze out some paint out of the container. So I'll go from thickest to thinnest. So first, here's the Liquitex heavy body. These are notoriously hard to break down with pouring medium, that's why most artists tend to avoid the heavy body. As you can see, it's very, very viscous, it leaves texture in the paint. Heavy body paints are usually used for paintings where you want texture, you want to see brush strokes, you want to lay the paint on so thick it almost becomes a sculpting element. Then we move into the medium body range. This is Liquitex Basics, which is probably the thickest paint I've ever seen calling itself a medium body. And then Amsterdam, which is what most fluid artists consider the standard for a medium body paint. Then you have Arteza. It's still medium, it doesn't look any different, but will feel a little thinner when you stir it. Up next is the Artist Loft Soft Body, and you can see it, while it still has peaks, it will definitely feel thin when you stir it. And moving on is one of our budget brands. This is Blicrylic from Blick, and this is essentially a budget level paint. This is supposed to be a medium body, but as you can see, it's thinner than the soft body it's sitting next to. And finally, we have the premixed paint, or also called pouring paint. Premixed or pouring paint is designed to be used as is, and while that can be convenient in some cases, ultimately it means you don't really learn as much about the process, and it can be quite expensive given that it doesn't increase in volume when you add the pouring medium. A typical tube of paint will triple in volume when you add your pouring medium, right? So why is this important? Well, it matters because using the wrong body of paint can yield dramatically different results. Most, if not all, recipes will call for using the medium body paints here in the middle. These ones right here. These are what I'm personally using. These are what your favorite YouTubers are using. And unless you're told otherwise, what a recipe is referring to when it says paint is this, the medium body paints. Okay, so now let's look at the fluid component, the pouring medium. This is what's called a retail pouring medium, meaning it is manufactured as a pouring medium. In most cases, this will be the most expensive option, but also the one that provides the most longevity and archival properties. Everything else is essentially a pouring medium alternative. They're emulsion-based fluids with a polymer of some sort that acts as a binder. The main difference between this and an actual pouring medium is they're not designed by an art company for the purpose of art. Right? Meaning it has less archival properties, if any at all, meaning it could be acidic, while art supplies generally try to avoid being acidic so they can be archival. So with that said, let's look at the pouring medium alternatives. The most common is the Floetrol family. These are water-based paint conditioners. They're designed to help house paints, or what you would call wall paint or emulsion paint in other parts of the world. It's designed to help that self-level and smooth out brush strokes when you apply it, right? But we found that when we use that with acrylic paint, it also gives those same self-leveling paint conditioning properties to the acrylic paint. So within the Floetrol family, there is specifically Flood Floetrol 6, which is what's used in North America, the US and Canada, basically. And in Europe, there's a separate product called Oatrol Paint Conditioner, and the separate product in Australia and New Zealand, also called Floetrol, but looks different. All three of these are what we call the Floetrol family. They're not actually made by the same company, but they more or less do the same thing for the purpose of being used as a pouring medium. The three of them have completely different viscosity though, but we'll compare that in a second. So another very affordable option is PVA glue. In terms of archival properties, glue ranks at the absolute bottom. It's the worst in terms of archival, longevity, art material quality, is the absolute worst. And there's no argument there. Like, no one will disagree with me on this. However, glue is very affordable and it is very widely available. And in a lot of countries where Floetrol and the Floetrol family is not available at all, PVA glue is probably going to be the option or the only option, right? So you can't discredit it completely. If it's the only thing available, you might as well use that. Now, there are some applications where you will mix acrylic paint with just water, and this works well in some techniques, usually the thinner ones, but not all of them, right? Because acrylic paint by itself has no self-leveling properties. Acrylic paint actually casts. If you let it dry as is, it will dry solid in its exact same shape. That means if you try to achieve a medium or thick consistency with acrylic paint and just water, it's not going to flow very well and it's not going to dry very nicely. It will likely have lumps or waves or texture, stuff like that. That's really where the Floetrol or the pouring medium helps. So just like it was important to know how thick or thin paints are in order to get your recipes to be accurate and behave correctly, the same essentially applies to the pouring medium. So I'm going to show you, this is how thick US Floetrol is right out of the container. It also fluctuates slightly from the manufacturer, but this is more or less what it should be like. If you're in Europe and you're using Oatrol, you'll notice that Oatrol is thicker than this. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand and you're using Australian Floetrol, you'll notice that Australian Floetrol is thinner than US Floetrol, right? So compare whatever it is you're using and you're going to need to adjust or compensate accordingly. If your pouring medium is thicker, you might need some water at the end to tweak the recipe. And if your pouring medium is thinner, you'll need to use more paint to thicken the final mix. And here's what that would look like. A recipe will usually tell you to mix 2 or 3 parts of Floetrol and 1 part of paint. This can be by volume or weight, depending on the artist. But it's best to find out which the artist intends, as that can yield dramatically different results, especially when you're mixing a higher volume of paint. I'm just going to eyeball this for this video, but basically you add the pouring medium to the cup, you add the paint to the cup, and you stir until it's all combined with no visible lumps. Sometimes, especially if the materials have been opened for a while or they've been sitting for a while, you're going to have lumps of dry material in there that won't dissolve. So it's usually good practice to strain the liquid mixture at the end before you use it in a painting. And that's it, my friends. That's how you prepare your paint for fluid art. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you want to learn more about fluid art in all the scientific detail, check out the online courses. I've linked them below in the comments. You're going to love them.